running smoothly. But thank you, Edward, and the rest of the training team for hosting this session for us. So yeah, we're here for the second in our Planning for Coronavirus webinars. My name's Chris Thompson. As Edward was saying, I'm a subject specialist in digital practice. I sort of lead the digital practice team. I was reflecting a little bit that the word planning is possibly a little bit redundant now, as we're well and truly in the thick of control measures, as no doubt we're all aware. So even if you were in the first webinar a week ago, you're probably joining us in very different circumstances this week. We've probably got a little bit of a balance of a bit more clarity and decisiveness from government and from other bodies, but we're now having to deal with a logistical challenge of trying to effect rapid change with a workforce and a student body that are now largely dispersed. But thank you very, very much for joining us for this one. I wanted to pick up on something that Dustin has said in the questions chat box down the bottom about being mindful that no one organisation has answers. We within JISC we are experiencing this emerging situation at the same time and the same rate as everybody else. So we're doing our best to keep up. We don't profess to have the definitive answers to things. What we've got today is perhaps a bit of an analysis of the situation and some recommendations, but we very much want this session to be a two-way thing. So please don't just kind of sit and listen. Please get involved in the chat. Please post your own questions. But if you see something that somebody's posting and you've got a good suggestion or good examples of best practice out there, please do contribute them. It's through sharing all this information that means we will actually get through this situation as best we can. Okay. Just before we begin, I wanted to set a little bit of groundwork with just some of the kind of recent activity that's been going on within JISC. So you've got access to all the advice and guidance that's going around at the moment. To keep everything together, we've launched a landing page within JISC around coronavirus. It's just jisc.ac.uk/coronavirus. That's probably a very good page to bookmark because it's the jumping off point for a lot of stuff. So any announcements about webinars, about guidance that's going out, links to the most recent blogs that have gone out on the JISC site as well as various other resources. So jisc.ac.uk/coronavirus, I would suggest bookmarking that one. But there are a few other things that are probably new on the agenda as well. Over the last week, we realized we needed to have a channel for very quickly being able to put together advice and guidance to get it out to the community and get conversations going around it. So we've started a dedicated blog around planning for coronavirus, which has got, I think, getting on for half a dozen posts in there at the moment, but that will be growing. We're doing our best to kind of keep the spread of voices on there as wide as we can, because obviously people are interested in lots and lots of different topics. So we're looking for expertise within JISC and beyond to help us with that. Also, colleagues within our sector intelligence team have been doing their best to draw together the disparate information that's kind of cropping up all over. If you're anything like me, you probably felt a little bit bombarded and bamboozled by the amount of information that has appeared in the last week, and trying to keep track of all the really good stuff that's out there and try and screen out some of the noise. It's a really difficult task. So Andy Stewart and Marion Shepherd are using a social bookmarking tool called Digo to put all this together, make it sort of tagged and bookmarkable and searchable, so that we can sort of give you a sort of a slice through some of that complexity. So I think Edward's going to put the link to that in the chat at the appropriate point. Something else to draw your attention to, something particularly for our further education colleagues. There is a regular ebooks for FE online clinic, which runs, I think, on Wednesdays, usually. And this time around, they are dedicating their webinar specifically to look at the learning resources that JISC has made available to support FE during the COVID-19 crisis, and also kind of summarize all the resources that publishers are making freely available to FE learners during this time. So that's happening between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock on Wednesday this week. So if that's of interest to you, then that'd be a good one to register for as well. Just to reflect a little bit on the outputs from last week's webinar, I mean, an awful lot's happened. And last week's webinar was, by necessity, quite wide-ranging. We weren't really entirely sure at that point what we should be focusing on. We have made video summaries of the main sections that we covered, which have been posted in the blog. So if you didn't get a chance to join that webinar, or you want a bit of a reminder, the blog that we posted about earlier, the Just Involved one, is probably a good place to go to for that. We asked at this, during that one, Steve Bailey, when he was running this, we sort of asked about what people's most pressing concerns were, as we did at the beginning of this one, because we're kind of interested to see how those are changing. Because obviously a week's a long time in a pandemic, so we kind of anticipate that this sort of response profile will change over time. So at the moment, people's priorities seem to be around getting teaching and learning online quickly, and aspects of student experience and well-being that come with that. So that's really why we focused on this particular topic today, this topic of moving learning and teaching online. So just to explain a little bit about how this is going to work, we're going to copy the format that we did last week. For the first 25 or 30 minutes, our subject specialist will highlight what we've identified as the main issues that have emerged after a week of listening to members, learners, news, social media, and so on. And after that time, then we'd like to open the space up to ask questions and share experiences. Please do, though, use the chat and use the question and answer box as we go through. We'll do our best to deal with things as they come up, but it'll be after that sort of half-hour point that we start to then look closely at what people have been putting in. Let me explain the agenda. In a second, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kelly Moat to set the scene for us a bit, and then Zach Gribber will take the reins to explain a bit about kind of what online learning delivery could look like. Some of the main factors to consider when you're approaching this situation of moving your learning and teaching online quickly. John Sumpter is then going to look at the online student experience and trying to, in a sense, get down to the real essentials of what needs to be covered. We'll hand over to Scott Hibberson at that point to look at supporting your teaching staff to make the transition to online learning, and I'll finish up with a quick bit about the student aspect of it, how can we prepare our students for online learning as well. So yes, please do ask questions as we go, and we'll begin now. So I'm going to hand over to Kelly. Kelly's going to explain a bit about how her own personal experiences sort of highlighted the main issues that, in fact, we're all facing, and some of the pointers that she learned from going through some of the situations. So, Kelly, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Hoping that my audio is coming through loud and clear.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it? Yeah, okay. Oh, sort of pause there, I was a bit worried. Okay, hi, everyone. Yep, it's Kelly here. So, yeah, as Chris kind of touched upon, there's loads of advice and information coming at lecturers right now. And it's easy for those of us who've been more experienced at online delivery to forget how daunting it can be to do it for the first time. So all the team here today are mindful that this way of working takes time to get right and involves some thought as well. So I've been delivering online courses now for 10 years, but I still remember how I felt when I was first told that I had to deliver an established face-to-face undergraduate level course online and with a quick turnaround. At that time, there wasn't as much information around about how to approach this. So important elements of my course were highly practical, involving lots of hands-on with technology. And I have to say, I was unconvinced that it would be possible to move online without losing important experiential learning and the peer learning that naturally happens in a group. So what helped? Working with a trusted colleague really helped. As Scott mentioned last week, JISC's Insights research demonstrates that many lecturers get most of their digital learning from colleagues. You can bounce around ideas and learn together in a relaxed way. If the other person has a slightly different skill set from you, then you can help each other, and that speeds things up as well. While delivering online is different, and these days we'd recommend developing content specifically with online delivery in mind, I initially found it helpful to have a look at what I already had and could be repurposed. Finding or making videos to demonstrate practical content was helpful, and it provided variety. Using a platform that was tried and tested seemed a good idea. I noticed that another organisation I rated highly was using Adobe Connect, which is what we're actually using here today. It looked good, it was supported externally, and it had the features that I needed, so we went with that, using Moodle for asynchronous learning. Something that took the pressure off was asking for feedback and really valuing the students' input. So it's a great way to learn what works and what doesn't for the next time you do it. For the practical content, we really needed to just step back and think about what it was we needed people to learn and evidence. Going back to the origins of the course, what core competencies were we developing and testing? So looking back, there's lots of things I wish I'd known. I was really caught up in creating something perfect, and it just wasn't the time. I was also too hung up on trying to replicate exactly what happened face to face, and that's just not possible. The first version of the online course, I feel it was hugely over-designed with post-session tasks and pre-session tasks, which was confusing, led to more work for us, and was too controlling. Something that caused me a lot of stress was feeling I needed to basically entertain online for an hour, whereas when face-to-face I wouldn't have done that. I would have been looking more to the group to continually contribute and collaborate. I also found that over subsequent years of running the same course, embedding my own values of universal design for learning and inclusiveness and accessibility really helped and provided lots of good ideas, such as providing a range of asynchronous content at different entry points. So some content for beginners that more experienced participants could skip to look at something more specialist. Finally, as you'll hear from our digital practice subject specialist today, I wish I'd just kept it simple and not felt the need to use so many new formats. An e-portfolio can be as simple as a Word document. The formats you use shouldn't be as time-consuming to learn as the course itself. Fortunately, we've now all got access to the specialists who are up next. I'm now going to pass you on to John and Zach, who will talk about how your online learning could look and what the student experience could be. So over to you guys now.
Thanks, Kay. That's great. Thank you. So John and I put some slides together about what online learning delivery could look like and what would the student experience be. And we just wanted to emphasize some priorities and keep in mind that a rapid change to a successful delivery of your taught content online needs to be a back and forth conversation between the organization, the staff, and certainly the students. So moving to a model of 100% online teaching could have thrown many staff into a worried state. Setting priorities in your strategy for success sounds obvious, but it could be being overlooked. We feel your priorities right now, as your staff begin in their new teaching challenges, must be the ability to get the teaching done. Equipment is essential. If they don't have access to working basics like a laptop, microphone, and a camera, the job will become more difficult, less satisfying, and motivation could drop. Items like a headset are especially useful, particularly as a lot of your staff will be sharing space with others at home. A key priority is ensuring your staff are aware of what is expected of them. This can really help with setting your standards. Some staff may be unsure about what they need to do to fulfill their roles in this new space. Also, how can your staff feed back on their challenges? Have you, as an organisation, created the channels for this? When setting up an online model of what your learning looks like, you should prioritise the staff voice in developing better practice moving forward. Again, this can help with confidence building and motivation. As an organisation, it's important to accept that while your staff feel that still find their feet, it will be a little rough around the edges. Some things may be clunky. So allow your teams to experiment and try new things, and be honest with your students about that. It may be helpful for your staff to be informed by your organisation that they don't have to suddenly learn huge new tools and platforms. As Kelly was saying, it doesn't have to be the latest new tools and innovations. It's perfectly acceptable to use familiar tools like PowerPoint or Word while they're finding their feet and their confidence grows. In fact, lower bandwidth options as part of this new delivery model are key to reducing the load on networks, particularly when on home Wi-Fi. As always, it's more about the content and the learning within. One change to note, though, is that students may be working together online more. In the JISC Insight Survey 2019 report, 29% of FE and 24% of AG said that they had never worked together online with other students. This could mean that while group work is an excellent way to engage students, as well as encouraging each other to be more connected in a time of isolation, some may find it as yet another challenge that they need to overcome. But student experience has always been at the forefront of a university's or college's efforts to keep students engaged. Prioritising the experience of your learners will be key to ensuring content is being delivered effectively. It's important to consider how you might develop ways to review your students' experience. Consider how you did it before. How can you do this remotely? And how will you act on feedback from your students in a timely way and communicate that with them? We feel it's certainly a priority worth considering, really emphasising the student voice. But many students have been delivering online courses to students all over the world for some time. There will be key experiences on this teaching and learning model to draw upon. How is the learning and student experience recorded and acted upon in these courses and programs currently? And what can the rest of us learn from the techniques and methods that are already in place for them? I'm just going to hand over to John now, who's going to continue this part.
Thank you, Zach, and hello everyone. I'd like to spend just a few moments discussing some of the aspects you need to consider when designing an online student experience. Then at the end of my presentation, I'd like to share with you some essential elements for online practice. However, I'd like to start by highlighting an excellent point made in the Twitter community. Graham on the UK FE chat hashtag sums up the dilemma facing teaching staff nicely. We all know that good online learning doesn't come overnight, but we have to keep an open dialogue wherever possible. The fancy stuff can come later. This comment is echoed by the points made by Zach just a few moments ago, and it's worth flagging these communities of practice on Twitter for both FE and HE, as they can be an invaluable source for support for staff. Follow the hashtags on the slide. At this point, I'd like to share a resource entitled Enabling Online Practice, and a link is being dropped into the chat pod now and can be downloaded after this briefing. The resource aims to kickstart the essential discussions required to understand the critical aspects of online development and provision. In this briefing, I will touch on just some of the key considerations. Of course, technology, a significant component of your approach. What type of technologies are you going to use? How are you going to support them? What bandwidth will be required? These are all big questions. The advice is to keep it simple and utilize better what you already have. Significant gains can be often found by helping staff understand what they already have access to, as opposed to introducing new technologies. Daniel Stamford wrote an interesting article about video conferencing and asks us to shift our thinking when we consider bandwidth options and approaches. A link to the post will be dropped into the chat room in a few moments. Netiquette. How do you communicate with learners online? To help, we have written an article about the subject, and again a link is being dropped into the chat. Interactions. Synchronous or asynchronous? It's already been mentioned in this presentation. Which one do you choose? Or do you have a mixture? The TEL team at Bath University are providing their staff with advice on how to deliver online and give some excellent generic advice. Again, a link is being dropped into the pod. A clear learning journey, well paced and with a clear timetable of events is imperative. Prompt feedback. More bite-sized feedback, smaller chunks and more often is possible with online. Your pedagogical approach you used, well, we could have and devote an entire session to this one subject. However, an example for online learning is to enable a social constructivist environment where learners facilitate shared understanding, defining goals, while tutors provide support, guidance, and steer learning, as mentioned by Kelly earlier. This is just one of many approaches, one which you will have to make your decision based on your circumstances, how you approach that. Managing expectations is hugely important, and ensuring students know what is expected of them is imperative. How can tutors be contacted? When will your fellow students be online? What tasks need to be completed and by when? It's important to factor in the various levels of digital literacy your students and staff will have. So at the very latest, make sure your timeframes take this into account. So why is online learning different from campus-based courses? It seems an odd question, but it's worth spending a few moments to at least consider some of the maybe less obvious differences. For example, are you still enabling a community of learners? This is one of the most critical aspects of learning, and particularly when delivered in an online environment. So as you move towards an online delivery, ensuring you build in as many opportunities for socialization and contact is imperative. Have you considered how you're going to support both staff and students with their well-being? Something we touched on in the last briefing. Time requirements, time zones, international aspects such as culture may also need to be considered. And motivation and engagement, a topic that will be picked up later in this briefing. Hopefully you will find this resource helpful to help prompt discussions. However, we recognise the unprecedented situation we all find ourselves in. So to help speed up your approach, here are some essential elements for online practice. Firstly, ensure you create a learning environment that is explicit in detail and clearly defined, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. This is imperative for learners who could feel isolated or confused. Ensure your environment is social, helping to build a community of learners who can share understanding, challenge assumptions, and promote well-being. And finally, ensure your learning environment uses technology that is appropriate for the audience and accessible. Remember, you can download a copy of both of these resources I've referred to after this briefing. I hope you found that helpful. So thank you for your time, and I'll now hand over to Scott.
Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everybody. So my colleagues have covered a range of considerations to take into account when helping staff make that rapid transition to online learning, all of which can appear a little overwhelming for those of us that are just starting on that journey. But I am very conscious as well that there's a lot of expertise across the sector already, and some of our members will be much further along on that journey. So what I would like to do in this next session is tap into some of those key concerns in relation to how you support your staff, but also, more importantly, build in that expertise that is already there across the sector. Moving towards an online learning model at scale seems like a huge mountain to climb and presents a number of concerns for teaching staff. Some of these were flagged in last Monday's online briefing, such as how can staff adjust to remote working? If you're not used to working from home, it can be a big adjustment. Technology is clearly the enabler here, but for folks to suddenly be video conferencing, virtually meeting and remotely collaborating with confidence is a big ask, and it's worth pausing to think about the human element here. Do staff feel confident when communicating with learners online? Many teachers are understandably very anxious about how to model appropriate online behaviour and protocols with learners. Questions over which platforms they should use and how to establish boundaries with learners are key. Finally, how do staff know they are getting online learning right? To reinforce Zach and John's earlier points, staff need reassurance that they are meeting the needs of their learners. We are all in this profession because we want to help our learners achieve their goals. The hard truth is that we are unlikely to get it right all of the time in these circumstances. But if we can keep the communication open with our learners, then we can learn what works and what doesn't together. These are just some of the questions. There are many others. We've recently set up a blog, which Chris flagged in his introduction, specifically around planning for the coronavirus, which contains our top tips and many useful links to resources that are already out there in the sector, so you can get some further help. The feedback from last week's online briefing was that people want to hear more about what others are doing to address some of the challenges ahead. With that in mind, we're going to open up a poll, so if you could open it up for me, Edward, that'd be great. And I want to tap into the wisdom of the crowds by getting you to reflect on one support challenge for teaching staff and something that you have done to address it. Now, I appreciate it's a little bit early to get a detailed case study on what everybody's been doing, but I'm going to give you a minute or so, I'll pause and stop talking now, just to think about one challenge that you've had at your organisation, and if you could pop it into the poll that's on screen, that would be great. So it doesn't have to be a perfect response to the particular challenge, it just needs to be something that has progressed it along and helped improve the situation for teachers. So I'm going to stop talking now and give you a minute to reflect on that and respond to the poll. Okay, while you're just finishing off the poll, just a couple of points. I can see 33 people have responded already. That's wonderful. The information that we get back from this poll will help to inform our future support. So I will try and group it together into key topic areas and then write something up on the blog as well and share that after this online briefing. So thank you very much for responding to the poll. I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Chris Thompson in a second. If we could just have a few more seconds while people finish off typing. Too late, the poll's gone. Right, so I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Scott. Just a final couple of thoughts, really, just to kind of get people thinking about preparing students for online learning. It's interesting that questions come up in the questions box about, I mean, particularly about re-engaging learners who are in danger of dropping off the radar. Students are finding themselves in probably quite a stressful situation at the moment. It's highly likely that a large percentage of them haven't actually engaged in any sort of purely online learning before, at least not in a formal sense. So it's worth thinking about kind of how we're preparing students or supporting them now that they find themselves in this new online environment. In particular, I've got two kids that are at home at the moment, 13 and 15, and they're going through this. So it's not something which we're immune from, certainly in this household. Just one thing to point out is that I've noticed a couple of mentions on social media in the last week, phrases like it's okay, they're digital natives or they're millennials. These young people will know what to do with this. They will be fine. And I think that's probably quite a dangerous assumption for us to be making. The terms digital natives and millennials bring with them all sorts of difficult problems about kind of reductionism and opening up the risk that we approach the way that we do online learning in a very sort of uncritical way, of just kind of assuming the students will get it, the students will work it out, and if we're putting together the teaching for them, perhaps it's not quite so important for us to think about how they're going to do that. But I really want to encourage people to challenge those assumptions about kind of using labels when they're thinking about students. One way of doing that is to think quite carefully about the context that people find themselves in. So if you can sort of imagine the situation that your students now find themselves in, well, ask yourself questions like, well, when are they learning? Where are they learning? How are they doing it? And what's going on around them? Because all these things are likely to have changed quite a lot. So, for example, when are they learning? Now, I have seen some people making recommendations that, as much as possible, try and stick to the existing timetables that you've got in college or on campus, and just to help with maintain the regularity of the day, the pattern of the day. And while there's something in that, that could also be quite restricting, because you can imagine students now finding themselves back at home, for example. They are having to deal with scarcity of digital resources. They might not have access to quiet spaces or even a single device that they can get online. So that's going to change the way that they can access their learning. So think about kind of when it is that they're likely to be learning. Are you providing them with learning that can be done at any time? Asynchronous work, work that can be done without sort of having to attend an online lecture, can be quite powerful. A good way around this. Where will they be learning? What sort of home environment is it? It could be that coming to college or coming to university is a welcome step away from a fairly disruptive household, a household they now find themselves back in. So how is that going to affect them? How will they engage with their learning in terms of what sort of devices are they using? It may be that they've only got access to a mobile device, and maybe their Wi-Fi isn't that great, or they've got a very limited data allowance. So if the curriculum that's being built for them is purely around real-time streamed video lectures, that's probably not going to be very accessible to them. Also remember that your students are a diverse group. I mean, that's not a hard thing to imagine, but there will be members of the student body that have very particular needs. Kelly talked last week a bit about making things accessible and accessible by default. The mantra within JISC is that if you design for accessibility and equality of access from the outset, then actually that's good for everybody, all your learners. So it's not something that should be a bit of an add-on. So so bear in mind what that looks like. If you're unsure about anything about the learner's context or what things are actually like for them, it's difficult for us to imagine them in that situation, then I guess the key thing really is to ask them. And Zach touched on this a little bit earlier as well, about keeping those flows of communication going. But it's quite easy in the panic of getting all this stuff up online quickly and trying to keep the momentum going, is that the student voice sometimes gets forgotten a little bit. So actually work with your students on this. Ask them what they find most useful, what things that they're struggling with. Try and establish more of a partnership with them, and be explicit about it. Be clear that you're asking for them to tell you how things are. Finally, just as a bit of a reminder, I remember when I was first getting involved in online learning, we spent a long time thinking about Gilly Salmon's model of e-scaffolding. This thing about kind of expecting quotes digital natives to be able to just kind of pick this stuff up and use it. It's hard. Online learning is hard. I'm sure all of us will find that. And it's worth thinking that when you're designing how your learners are going to engage with this, not to kind of throw them in at the deep end and kind of expect them to get on with it, but think about how that sort of approach to learning can be structured. So this was Gilly Salmon's 5 steps model. We're thinking about, yes, we probably do want to get to a point where we are doing higher level learning activities, collaboration, reflection, and so on. But actually, before we even get there, we need to do work about even the basics about making sure they can get online. Are they able to log in? Are they able to use the systems appropriately? Are they getting the technical support for it? And then are they being brought into a community? How are you making them feel welcome? How are you making them feel that it's okay to participate in online communities? Because some people will take to that very easily, some won't, some will be very reticent. So the point here really is to think about how you are scaffolding that approach. Don't just kind of expect people to be up and running within the first week. Think quite carefully about what happens this week. What are the easier to access challenges that you can help people with now, so that eventually as we get into this, and we might be in this for weeks, we can provide a better foundation for things that come later on. I'm going to stop there, and because we're now at 25 to 3. So what you've had there is a bit of a whistle-stop tour from us. The point, as we said before, is not to provide you with lots of answers, but perhaps to provide you with a framework of questions and topics for thought. But just want to spend a bit of time now sort of opening the floor, really. We've got the questions chat box there, which is ready for us. You can see that there's quite a lot of stuff is going on there. Edward, thank you for making that a little bit more visible for people. So I just wanted to give a minute of sort of quiet just for people to reflect a little bit and perhaps take a bit of time just to think about, well, what are the questions that you're finding yourself having to deal with, and particularly in the last week, what are the challenges that have come up that perhaps you weren't expecting, that have emerged, that you're having to face now, you're having to get answers for when it comes to that sort of online learning environment. There's an adage, it's a military adage, that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and I suspect that might be a little bit of what's going on with people. Now we're in it. How are things going? So I'm going to just stop talking for a little bit, let people put some thoughts in, put some questions. And if you see things that you want to answer, then have a go at it. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm doing my best to kind of keep up with what's going into the two different chat boxes there. I just want to pick up on, and I've lost it now, whoever it was that said it, but I thought it was a really good question. Katie Limmer asked the question, how would you recommend planning ahead when we don't have an end date in sight? Half a term at a time, unit at a time? Coming at this from sort of an A level rather than an HE lecture, but I think, Katie, that's probably quite a universal challenge for people. So let me just sort of open that out just for people at the moment. I mean, I guess my initial response to that would have been thinking about that scaffolding model, but that's probably more in the kind of the startup phase. It's not really thinking about, well, that sort of ongoing curriculum design side of things. So let's just see what people come back with on the chat for that one. Okay, thank you, Sonia from UCL here, from UCL, talking about planning ahead. So having a basic outline for the rest of the academic year, but plan in detail, delivery approaches, tasks, etc., at least a week in advance, so you can share this with students and develop some independent flipped learning, collaborative learning, and differentiation. So I guess taking it, having an idea of structure, but then doing the kind of the detailed stuff in terms of creating the resources and creating the the detailed tasks on more of a rolling basis. I mean, I guess my first reaction to that is from a student point of view, it's helpful for them to know what the large structure is, particularly at a time when a lot of people's kind of day-to-day structure is pretty much falling apart. So if we can provide them with that kind of predictable, reasonably predictable environment where they sort of know what's likely to be coming up over the next weeks, of the order that things are going to happen, and so this week we'll be focusing on that in a week's time and so on. Any other thoughts from the rest of the subject specialists on that one?
Hi,
John.
Hi, Chris. It's Kelly here.
Hi,
oh,
Chris.
sorry,
Oh,
it's John going to.
Kelly,
John,
you
I'll let you go first.
No, you go first, Kelly.
All right. Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think as well, what we can do at this point in time where we're kind of, okay, we've got the rest of the academic year to go, is use this time to, not be too hard on ourselves and get students to feedback on what's working and what isn't, so that we can prepare for the next phase as well, because it could be, we don't know yet, but it could be that the start of the next academic year we may still be doing this, but at least you'll have a longer run-in then. So I think really centering that student feedback about what's working, what isn't, and it kind of gives you a little bit of leeway as well, if you're really kind of honouring that feedback too. So that's all I was going to chip in with. John, you probably have something more.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Kelly. No, I I completely agree with you, and I suppose just to reiterate some of those points, but I think we should not forget some of the more basic principles, as Chris was relating to. Many of us are right now at home, the house is full, it's a busy time and it's difficult to do what we're all trying to do really well. So using some of those techniques that we may have forgotten or become lax at just to organise our day, I think is more important than ever. There's been messages in there about, in the conversations and chat, around notification overload. Absolutely, and we're all diving on these new systems as well, or existing systems, and they're being used more than they've ever been used before. So consequently, we're all getting these notifications more than we ever had before. So setting yourself some form of rules around how you're going to engage through the day, when you're going to prioritize your responses to emails, to notifications. Do you choose a time, say lunchtime or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, to mute notifications so you can focus on what you're doing? It all sounds quite basic, but actually I think it's easy to forget some of these simple techniques which will give us some breathing space and allow us to do what we want to do. I think just finally on thinking about the students and how we plan for the year, as long as it's clear for them, we can buy ourselves time, but as long as the students at the other end have got a really clear learning journey, when they log on, they know what's expected of them, whether that be planned out for next week or 3 weeks ahead or a month ahead, as long as it's clear and they won't get confused, that's a positive thing.
Thanks, both of you. I mean, this all kind of, at least for me, kind of centers around this thing about engagement, keeping people engaged, and the risk of people dropping off the radar, which is one of the questions that came up a little bit earlier as well. And I've just kind of noticed that there's quite a lot of mention of TikTok in there, particularly around summative assessment, which I think is really interesting. Somebody saying TikTok is their cathartic go-to now. That's Dustin. Thank you, Dustin. And just reading that has made me reflect a little bit on keeping people engaged. I mean, I mentioned doing things kind of the higher end of learning a little bit earlier, about kind of proper collaborative activities and reflective work. But I think that's always got to be balanced with the fact that keeping people engaged also involves giving them tasks which are kind of easily achievable, even if it's just a question of asking a simple question in the chat window. How are you feeling at the moment? Or kind of, what did you think of this particular TV show that was on Netflix? Or something like that. Something which is kind of easily answerable by people, so that you can kind of maintain, people aren't having to work too hard to kind of be present and to demonstrate that they're engaged. Again, just kind of looking.
Okay, yeah, Chris, I was just going to jump in because there was some topics raised earlier on that I think are really important, especially for, there's a lot of emphasis on things like, university lectures, kind of going online and things, but think now, so Dave and Joe, I'm just scrolling back up again, we're focusing a lot on FE students who maybe are, in quite kind of entry-level courses and are really at the stage where they're basically learning how to learn, and it's there's whole other challenges, especially around disengagement and the impact of poverty and things like that. So not that I've got any answers off the top of my head, but I know Sarah Knight shared an example of something that's been done at Grimsby College, I think, to help engage students. But I wonder if you're still in, and even actually, I think we can, if you want a bit of variety from our voices as well, I think Edward can give you the mic if you like. I don't know if Dave Hiddleston from Edinburgh College, I don't know if you would like to even talk a bit, because I know you've been working a lot with students who are needing to establish kind of basic digital skills at this point. Would you like to talk? Do you have a headset? If you activate your mic, sorry, I've just jumped on you. There, but we can keep sort of chatting in the box if we need to as well. But I think that thing, these kind of basics or foundational skills. And also another thing I wanted to pull out as well was the topic. It was Verna who mentioned talk like the big picture here, the kind of impact on mental health, the anxieties that people will have, and how do we provide mental health support at distance to students. So, I mean, I think these aren't things that, we've got easy answers to right now, but I think these are really areas that are worth expanding on, and the kind of things we can expand upon in the blog and in future sessions as well. I'm just looking, Dave, is your mic working? Just thought it'd be nice to hear from you. Yes, I can hear you. You're a bit quiet, but I can hear you.
Let me just adjust it in slightly.
Oh, hear you loud and clear now. It'd be great to hear some of your experiences, Dave, and working with the student group that you do work with.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, most of these learners are hard to reach learners, and it's hard enough engaging them in online resources in the classroom. So the way it's delivered in the classroom is it's to enhance what they do. Now we've quickly had to shift to online delivery, and it's trying to get the learners that are disengaged from school, they've entered college, they're doing vocational subjects, and it's just trying to get them engaged online. Now what I've done is I've given them a wide range of options, but all the options they're used to. So I've kept it simple. We use the online environment, Moodle, and I use live chat. That's new to them, but the actual environment's not. So they're used to that. Now, a few of them are engaging. So I really started this last Thursday, and I would say that I've got about 50% of learners engaging. So they have been in contact, but I've also offered them mobile phone, so they can text, they can phone, they can email, and over a class of about 15, I've got about 7 or 8 engaging, because it also concerns me about the well-being of these individuals as well, because a lot of them coming to the college is engaging in learning in life, not just work but in learning. So it's been a bit of a journey, and it's only started last Thursday, and I'm hoping that this time, maybe next week, there'll be some data there that's probably worth sharing. So I've chose 3 groups and looked at their activity and kept the stats based on Moodle. Hope that's been some help.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that is. It's really good to hear your point of view from the kind of cool face of things. Yeah. I think that was good tips on providing a range of materials. I think we need to remember as well, and I'm sure this is borne out by the research that Jessica's done, is that in FE a lot of students are using their phones as their primary device for accessing learning. They won't have laptops. So I think, it's nice simple content that is going to display on a phone, and giving them the option to use their phone to keep in touch with you as well is a really good tip. So that's fab. I think this will be an interesting. I think there'll be a lot of interesting learning coming out of this period as well, that we can maybe look at. Well, how do we capture that for the future as well? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing some folks there saying that use of mobile phones is sort of prohibited in some contexts. So yeah, I mean there's all these kind of barriers and facilitators that are arising around this time that we're kind of got to work our way through. So I'm aware we've only got a few minutes left, so I don't know if there was any other questions any of the other subject specialists wanted to pick up upon. I'm seeing Andy's given our 365 consultant given lots of people lots of helpful tips there. But, any final thoughts? Do we have? I think we've got a final poll, do we, for people as well?
I think the first question that we asked at the beginning of the session, I think probably covers it, to be honest. So Edward, if it's all right, we'll skip that penultimate poll. Just a little bit of reflection for me. Just looking through the chat and the stuff in the questions window. It's really clear to me that a lot of the questions around your own well-being and your own support, which is absolutely inevitable and understandable given the situation that you find yourselves in. I want to have just before we wrap up at the end of today, I just want to make a quick mention about the JISC Planning for Coronavirus community that we set up a little while ago. But before we get into that, I'm just taking a little bit of a scan back through. There's an awful lot of text to look at here, which we're really, really grateful that people have got fully involved in today's session. So thank you for that. But I'm just a little bit worried that we're going to miss something vital. Is there a final question that anybody from the community, any of the participants, want to drop in here before we start wrapping up? Anything from the presenters or anyone from JISC? I know there's other JISC colleagues in the participants and presenters list. Notice a few people are typing, so I'm going to give them a bit of an opportunity to finish that. So Verna, that looks interesting. Supporting students' emotional well-being at this time. 5-minute video, which I will check out later. But it seems like the well-being, particularly for staff and students, seems to be like a core theme, and perhaps that's something that we need to be looking at for something in the very near future. Again, just to remind you about that list on DIGO. I shall drop the link into the chat just now. Some of the highlights from the information that's been going around the web. Okay, I think we should wrap up because time's almost on us, and I'm sure there are other things that we need to be getting on with. Edward, could you take us back to the screen with the slides on it? Thank you. I can't seem to move them forward. There we go. Final word about the community. That's the one. Okay. About a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we set up a Microsoft Teams-based community to host asynchronous conversations within the membership around what they were doing. Also to see even some of the stuff that JISC was doing, but primarily it's a space for conversation. It's still open for the time being, but a little word about that in a second. We've got about 725 people in there now, which is a great resource to be able to tap into. If you would like to join it, you'd be very, very welcome to, and that is the link on the screen that you need to go up, take you to a survey. It's good for you to put in your details about kind of name, email address, institution, that sort of thing, and then we go through every so often and just take a bit of a scrape of who's gone in recently and then invite them in. But we've been really, really pleased with the response to the idea of the community. So thank you to everyone that has actually joined it as well. We're about to move into phase 2 because we kind of think we're getting to a very large number of participants, but we need to take a little bit of a step back and have a think about how we're managing it, what it's for, whether people are getting value out of it. It's very much supposed to be about mutual support, so that's what we're trying to encourage. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take a bit of a pause on the community, not to close it, it will remain open, but we're not going to, after today, so from tomorrow morning, we're not going to be accepting any new members for a period, just so that we can kind of embed things and and just kind of take stock of things. So if you would like access to it, you're still very, very welcome. I don't want to put you off. So please fill in the form today. We are aware of some access issues. Again, it's one of these things about using new tools to do new things that perhaps they weren't built for in the first place, or at least not without some of the particular context in mind. So please do bear with us while we sort of try to improve that onboarding process. We're going to be using Teams for kind of sharing a lot of our learning, but it's really there about, you know, hearing from you. We'd love to hear if you're already a member of the community and you've been struggling to use it, or you're not quite sure how to access it, then please do get in touch with, I think with me in the first instance. It's probably the best person to talk to. So we're going to keep checking in with you to make sure that the community is delivering on what you need. But just to finish this off, because we are at 3 o'clock, I just want to put a final poll up. If you could do that for us, Edward, which is just to find out a bit from you about. So there you go. What would you like to see from the Just Coronavirus community page over the coming weeks? So what is it that you would value most from being able to access that mutual support? What are the key questions you're wanting help with? I mean, particularly because it's just, it's particularly around that kind of digital environment, digital ecosystem, digital experience side of things. But I know people, you know, sometimes value things from the fringes of that as well. So please do take some time as we close up today, just to put in some thoughts there. That'd be very, very helpful for us for kind of reassessing where we go on this. So we'll put the link in again. Oh, there it is. Zach's put it in the chat box on the left for signing up. But that is it. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to my presenters and the people that were sort of available on standby for us. Hat tip to you, Laurie Phipps, and Esther Barrett as well. We will be announcing what we're going to be doing for the next one later. It may not be next Monday that we do. Again, we're probably going to take a little bit of a pause on kind of how we're approaching these things and have a careful look at what we feel the community needs and how we can best support it from within JISC. So keep your eye on that coronavirus landing page for announcements, or join the community, and that's where the announcements will pop up also. But thank you to the presenters. Thank you to everybody who's joined us and participated. It's been great to see so much input into the chat and the discussions. So thank you very much. We'll leave the room open for a little while, but we hope to see you again sometime soon. And good luck, everybody. We hope you're doing okay. You're managing this new situation as best as you can, and you're staying healthy, as are all your loved ones. Thanks very much, everyone.